Well, I'm very excited about 2019, I must say, compared to 2018 when we were in the middle of a gigantic hype cycle. This is a year where I think we're a little bit quieter. We're focusing on the specifics of the tech, really getting the tech to a place where it's ready for scalability. We've addressed some of the concerns around interoperability and latency. So it's perhaps a less sexy year in terms of the appetite and the hype and the buzz around it, but it's a building year. And I think the industry needed that, so I'm very excited about that. Well, I do think that governments are getting deeply engaged with this technology. I think they're seeing a lot of the benefits around some of the aspects of access to information or transparency, enhanced security that this system can provide. And I think that we're in a moment politically and culturally where governments are feeling more accountability towards their citizens. And I do think this technology has applications that could help promote government's accountability in that way. In terms of the creator of the Bitcoin blockchain, I think that's going to remain a mystery probably for a very long time, if not forever. Yeah, I think that many central banks, if not most of them, are paying very close attention to this technology. We actually are speaking to about 35 central banks on a very regular basis. And I do think in the next 18 months, we're going to see the issuance of a central bank digital currency. Thus far, the banks have been more focused on operations, movement of money, like you say, interbank settlements, these kinds of things. And I do think that as the latency of the technology, the speed increases, we're going to see more of that experimentation as it makes things more efficient, particularly cross-border. But I also think that from a macroeconomic policy perspective, we're going to see a lot more investigation and experimentation with digital fiat and central bank digital currencies as well. Well, it's still an early technology. Some would argue at most we're in its adolescence, but I think we're still really in the infancy stage. And so big investments in blockchain still do remain big bets. And so I think it's a question, is the policy environment, the regulatory environment going to support those kinds of somewhat risk-taking maneuvers and investments in the space, or are we going to see something come that looks more a little bit like a crackdown? Now, my view is that there's quite a bit of openness on the part of regulators and governments to this technology, so I'm not overly concerned about it, but it remains a risk. So we see blockchain as a connective and foundational technology, and I think what's going to make this technology truly leapfrog and be transformative is the way it intersects and interacts with AI and machine learning, with IoT, with data streams that flow from drones, autonomous vehicles, these kinds of things. And so we see this as a fundamental foundational layer of a technology stack that involves the other 4 IR technologies and can help transform society. I think we're moving to a more and more paperless world, and I do think we're going to hit a time at which the minting of money is perhaps of less value than it is now. Do I think that's going to happen anytime soon? I don't. I think that there are still large parts of the world where money and cash really trades hands. It really is paper-based transactions. And as much as cryptocurrency can approximate that in a digital environment, we don't really have the infrastructure in certain parts of the world where this would be the most relevant quite yet.
And also regulations, right?
That's right. I think that's right, exactly. There's all kinds of regulatory questions that a full movement to a digital system would actually entail and open up. I do. I think there are commodities to some extent like other commodities. And so I think it depends to what extent investors and the sectors remain bullish on this technology. I think they should remain bullish on it. I just think that the transformation that we imagine, we always knew would take longer than the hype cycle of 2018 promised. Well, it's an interesting question because I don't know that the user level adoption is what we're so focused on. I think this technology really does analogize to the internet in the sense that you don't really think about using the internet every day, although you do. It's kind of a part of the infrastructure that you engage with. And so I think blockchain technology will become more and more invisible in a way. It will become buried in a technical stack. And so you may or may not know you're using a blockchain, but you will be using a blockchain for something. Well, I think recessions are caused by a variety of factors, and I don't know that any particular currency option is going to solve that. I think there's so many things that go into that: labor markets, global trade, all kinds of other things. But a lot of this is about people's sensitivities and inclinations about how strong the economy is and how it's doing. And I do think that there's a bolstering effect that we might see. It could be that this is a tool that's used by central banks or others to bolster economies that perhaps are lacking in confidence. So I think that's one of the potential options. I do think that there are ways of deploying the distributed ledger, the transparency aspect I mentioned, that could actually give regulators real-time access to deal flows and transactions in a way that could actually mitigate corruption. Now, that being said, it isn't a default or an automatic that more transparency would lead to a mitigation of fraud. If anything, it could lead to more exploitation. So I think we have to be really careful in how we craft policy around the use of these kinds of technologies and currencies in order to ensure that we're actually creating a more just society.
For SMEs?
Yeah, this is a great question. I do think we saw in the ICO model, one of the positive things about it, I think, was that we saw that there were new opportunities for financing outside of the traditional kind of venture model. Now, that being said, we've seen obviously the downside of the ICO model, and we've seen what can happen when you have a bit of overhype in a funding model as well. I do think that, as you know, SMEs are the backbone of the economy, and I do feel like there's going to be some more openness to experimentation around how you get funding. I particularly think that tokenization could be an interesting avenue for raising funds that could provide incentives for users to actually engage with a particular product or service in a way that would generate its own internal currency.